A white woman woke up married to a rancher, only to learn she replaced a dead woman. She woke up slowly, blinking against the soft morning light that streamed through heavy curtains. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The room was large, warm, and unfamiliar, with wooden floors that creaked gently under her movement. A soft breeze from an open window carried the faint smell of grass and earth. She sat up, noticing the unfamiliar sheets, the sturdy wooden bed, and a small table beside it, neatly arranged with a glass of water and a folded note. Her head ached, a dull pounding that made her fingers tremble as she touched her temples. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and felt the wooden floor under her bare feet. Everything was strange. She didn't recognize the room. The furniture, though elegant in a rustic way, seemed alien. The walls were decorated with pictures she didn't recognize, scenes of wide open fields, horses grazing, and a man she had never met. Yet the most shocking detail was the presence of a wedding photo on a nearby dresser. She froze, staring at it. It showed a smiling couple in formal wedding attire. The woman in the photograph looked exactly like her, down to the curve of her jaw and the color of her hair. She blinked again, thinking she must be dreaming. The sound of boots on the wooden floor made her turn sharply. A man entered the room, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a plaid shirt and worn jeans, his face lined with sun and weather. "Morning, honey," he said with a warmth that startled her. "Sleep well." She shook her head, feeling a rising panic. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her own words sounded strange to her, as if the air itself refused to cooperate. "I'm your husband," he replied, smiling gently. "You look like you had a rough night. Don't worry, I've got coffee ready for you downstairs." Her mind raced. Husband? Coffee? She remembered nothing like this. She lived in a city far from these wide open spaces, in an apartment that had never smelled like fresh hay or horse feed. She had a life full of friends, work, and ordinary routines. She had never even visited a place like this, let alone been married. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You're wrong. I don't know you. I'm not." Her voice faltered. She didn't know how to explain the confusion swirling in her mind. But the man's eyes held no doubt, no uncertainty. To him, this was normal. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're just groggy. You'll remember soon." She wanted to run, to escape, but when she tried to leave the room, she noticed the door was slightly ajar, and beyond it, the house seemed quiet. No neighbors, no familiar city sounds, just the gentle hum of life on a ranch, the low mooing of cows, a soft whinny from a horse outside, and the occasional crowing of a rooster. She felt trapped in a life that wasn't hers, yet everyone treated it as if it was. As she moved cautiously toward the window, she saw the vast land stretching beyond the house. Rolling hills, golden fields, and the outline of mountains in the distance created a picture so beautiful that it almost made her forget the fear crawling up her spine. Yet the beauty was terrifying because it reminded her that she had no idea where she was or how she had arrived. Downstairs, the smell of coffee and cooked eggs filled the air. The man was in the kitchen, moving with an ease that suggested years of routine. He looked up as she entered, his expression calm and reassuring. "Sit down," he said. "I made your favorite eggs, bacon, and toast. You need to eat something." She looked at the plate, at the food she had never asked for, yet it was presented with a familiarity that was deeply unsettling. Her hands shook as she sat at the table. Questions raced through her mind. How did she get here? Why did everyone insist she belonged in this place? Who was this man, and why did he claim to be her husband? The man didn't notice her panic. He talked about daily chores on the ranch, mentioning horses, cattle, and fences, as if she had always known how to manage them. She nodded slowly, trying to appear normal, though she had never been on a ranch before in her life. She listened to him talk about the fields, the upcoming harvest, and neighbors who might visit, but every word felt like a language she had never learned. After breakfast, he suggested they take a walk outside. She hesitated, then followed him, drawn to the fresh air and open land. The sun was warm on her face, and the wind whispered through the tall grass. Yet every step made her feel further away from the life she remembered. Horses grazed nearby, their movements graceful and calm, unaware of the strange tension between her and the man she was supposed to call husband. The man tried to engage her in conversation, asking about her day yesterday, about errands she might have run, about the neighbor's family. Every answer she gave had to be carefully measured because the truth, that she had no memory of any of this, would make him suspicious. Yet he seemed patient, and in his eyes she saw something like love or perhaps relief. Relief that she was here, that life was continuing, that the loss he had suffered might somehow be softened by her presence. By the time the sun was high in the sky, she realized she could not escape the truth that confronted her. Something was terribly wrong. She was in a place she did not belong, with a man who believed she was someone she was not. And the world around her, the house, the land, the animals, was real, undeniable, and alive. Her mind reeled as she tried to piece together the fragments of memory she still held. Her apartment, her friends, her city life, all gone from immediate reach, existing only in a hazy, unreachable corner of her mind. As she wandered the property, she noticed small details that made her question everything. A locked door in the corner of the house, a cabinet filled with photographs and mementos of a life she couldn't recognize, and a journal that seemed to belong to her, but the handwriting was not hers. Each discovery deepened her confusion and fear. Who was she now in this strange world? Was she truly herself, or had her identity been replaced in some impossible way? Evenings on the ranch were quiet, with the sky painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun set behind the distant mountains. She sat on the porch, listening to the soft sounds of animals settling in for the night. The man brought her a cup of tea and sat beside her, speaking gently about life, work, and the future they would share. Though his tone was kind, it could not erase the gnawing feeling that she was living someone else's life, that she had awoken in a story she was never meant to be part of. Night fell, and she returned to the bedroom, the same one she had woken in. The wedding photograph still stared back at her from the dresser. She touched it gently, almost afraid it might burn her fingers. The man kissed her forehead as she lay down, whispering, "Sleep well, my love. Tomorrow will be better." She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come easily. Questions spun in her mind like a storm. How had she arrived here? Why did everyone insist she was someone else? And most terrifying of all, who was she now? The room was quiet, the house silent, but the unease inside her grew. She realized with a sinking feeling that her life as she remembered it might be over. The world she had woken up in was not hers, and yet she could not deny that it existed, real and tangible, waiting for her to step into it or run from it. Hours passed. She lay in bed, listening to the wind, the distant calls of animals, and the soft breathing of the man who insisted she was his wife. The sense of disorientation was overwhelming, yet a small part of her felt a strange curiosity. Who was this man? What had happened to the woman who came before her? And how, somehow, had she become a part of this remote, quiet world? By the end of the night, she had not found answers, but she had discovered a small truth. Running or denying her new reality would not help. She would have to face the life she had woken into, piece by piece, and try to understand how a city woman, a stranger in a land of ranches and fields, could survive in a world that claimed her as its own. The first day had ended, but her journey was only beginning. As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, the last thought in her mind was the terrifying question that would haunt her in the days to come. What if the life she had known was truly gone, and she had become someone else forever? The next morning she woke up to the same warm sunlight streaming through the curtains, but the unease she felt yesterday had not left her. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The soft creak of floorboards, the low hum of animals outside, even the gentle ticking of a clock. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the strange life she had woken into pressing down on her. Everything around her, the furniture, the photographs, the clothes in the closet, was real. The man who called himself her husband was real. And yet nothing was familiar. She moved slowly through the house, careful not to disturb anything. Her eyes landed on the small kitchen where breakfast had been prepared. The aroma of eggs and bread filled the air, making her stomach growl despite her anxiety. He entered the room just as she was reaching for a glass of water. "Good morning," he said, smiling as though nothing was wrong. "Did you sleep okay?" She hesitated. Her mind raced with questions, but she knew she could not reveal the truth. Not yet. I slept," she replied softly. "Thank you for breakfast." He nodded and handed her a plate. "You'll need energy today. There's work to do outside. The horses need feeding and the cattle have to be checked." She felt a knot in her stomach. She had never worked on a ranch in her life. The thought of being expected to do all these unfamiliar tasks was overwhelming. Yet she could not escape. There was nowhere to go, no one to call, no explanation that would make sense. After breakfast, he took her outside. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of hay and earth. Horses grazed peacefully nearby, and the cattle moved slowly across the fields. She had never been this close to animals before, and the sheer scale of the land both amazed and terrified her. She felt small, insignificant in comparison to the vast open space around her. "Come on," he said, guiding her toward the barn. "You'll need to learn quickly if you're going to live here. Don't worry, I'll help you." She nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and fear. The barn was large, filled with the smells of hay, leather, and animals. Horses whinnied softly, their eyes curious as she approached. He handed her a bucket and instructed her on feeding them. Her hands shook as she carried out the task, spilling water and feed more than once. He corrected her gently, never raising his voice, but each mistake made her feel more like an imposter. Throughout the day, she learned more about the routines of ranch life. She was expected to remember chores, to anticipate needs, and to respond as if she had always belonged. Every time she hesitated or made a mistake, she caught the briefest flicker of frustration in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by patience and encouragement. She realized that he had been doing this alone for some time, and perhaps her presence, even if she did not belong, was a relief to him. As the sun climbed higher, she noticed other signs that life here had a rhythm she could never have imagined. A fence needed repairing, the animals required constant attention, and the work never truly ended. The man explained each task carefully, yet the pressure to perform as the late wife had was implicit. Neighbors would come by, and she was expected to greet them with familiarity, to remember conversations she had never had, and to appear as though she had always been part of this world. The first visit came in the afternoon. A woman and her 2 children arrived, calling out greetings. The woman smiled warmly, touching her arm as if they were old friends. She froze, unsure how to respond. Every instinct told her to be honest, to say she had never met them before, but the man squeezed her hand subtly, a silent warning. She forced a smile and nodded, trying to mimic the warmth she had seen in photographs. The neighbor chatted easily, asking about recent events and small-town news. She answered vaguely, praying that her lack of memory did not reveal her secret. After they left, the man turned to her. "You did fine," he said. "It's okay if you don't remember everything." "You'll get there," she wanted to cry. The kindness in his voice made her feel both guilty and trapped. He had clearly been alone for a long time, grieving in silence, and somehow she had become part of that grief. And yet she was not herself. She had never agreed to any of this. She had been dropped into a life that demanded she be someone she was not. As the days passed, she noticed more subtle clues that something about this life was not hers. A photograph tucked behind a frame showed the man with another woman, smiling in a way that only someone who truly belonged together could. She recognized the face immediately. It was the woman she resembled in the wedding photo, the woman she was supposed to be. The realization hit her like a wave. She had not simply woken up in a new place, she had replaced someone who was gone. She began exploring the house more carefully. A locked door on the second floor caught her attention. The man explained that it was private, but he seemed distracted when she asked about it. Her curiosity grew. She found a cabinet filled with personal items, letters, photographs, mementos, all belonging to the woman who had died. She handled them carefully, feeling an odd connection as if touching a life that had once been hers, yet was now completely separate. Her nights were the hardest. She lay awake, listening to the quiet of the house, the distant sounds of animals and the occasional whistle of wind across the fields. She remembered her city life, the friends, the apartment, the familiar streets, but it felt like a dream fading in the morning light. In the quiet, she asked herself questions she could not answer. How had she arrived here? Why had she survived when the other woman had not? And most terrifying of all, who had decided that she should take this place, this identity, this life? Despite her fear, she could not ignore the growing realization that she had to adapt. Survival required it. She had to learn the routines, to speak the right words, to act as if she belonged. The man continued to teach her patiently, showing her how to feed the horses, mend fences, and care for the land. Slowly, she began to pick up the skills she never knew she needed. Yet every step forward was tempered by the constant awareness that this was not her life, and she was living it only because the dead woman had left a void that needed filling. One afternoon, as she worked in the barn, she overheard a conversation the man had with a neighbor through the open door. They spoke of the woman who had died, of how much she had been loved, and how hard it had been for the man to continue without her. He listened silently, nodding, his face set in a mask of grief. She realized then that her presence, though unintentional, was helping him cope with a loss he could not bear alone. And in that moment, she felt both a strange guilt and a quiet sorrow for the life that had ended, and for the life she had been forced into. Evenings became a mixture of exhaustion and reflection. She would sit on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, feeling the wind on her face and the weight of the unknown pressing on her chest. The man would join her, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent. Each day was a delicate balance, learning, pretending, observing, surviving. She began to understand the rhythm of the land, the patterns of life that had once been the dead woman's, and she realized that while she had replaced someone, she also had to find a way to preserve herself. As the week went on, small moments of comfort began to appear. She found that she could ride a horse without fear, that she could feed the cattle efficiently, that she could speak to neighbors without faltering. She still felt out of place, still longed for the city life she had lost, but a part of her began to see the beauty in this world. The open fields, the clear skies, the quiet nights, all were unlike anything she had known. And while she could not forget the injustice of her situation, she started to notice that life here, though strange and forced, had its own rhythm, one that demanded respect, patience, and resilience. Yet, even as she adapted, the truth remained buried just beneath the surface. The dead woman's life had been perfect in ways she could never replicate. Every smile, every habit, every memory was absent from her mind. She could mimic, she could perform, but she could not truly replace what had been lost. And the man, her supposed husband, still looked at her sometimes with longing, with sorrow, as if trying to reconcile the woman he had lost with the one who had appeared in her place. By the end of the second week, she understood something vital. Surviving here required more than learning skills or performing routines. It required patience, intelligence, and courage. She had to navigate a world built on grief, memory, and expectation, and she had to do so without losing herself entirely. She began keeping a private journal, writing down her own thoughts, her own memories, and her own questions. It became a secret space where she could reflect, where she could remind herself that she was still a person beyond this borrowed identity. And so, life continued. Days filled with labor, quiet conversations, and stolen moments of reflection. She learned the rhythm of the ranch, the patterns of the animals, and the expectations of a community that had already mourned and moved on. She was living another woman's life, yes, but she was beginning to understand the fragility, the beauty, and the complexity of that life. Even though she did not know how long this new reality would last, she realized one thing with clarity. She had survived the impossible, awoken into a world she did not recognize, and she was determined to find her own place in it. Not as a replacement, not as an echo, but as someone who could navigate the past, the present, and the uncertain future that awaited her. As the days turned into weeks, the woman began to notice things she had missed before. Little details that didn't fit, small inconsistencies, and moments of silence that seemed heavier than the rest. The rancher, the man who had called her his wife from the very first morning, carried a weight she could sense even when he smiled or spoke gently. He had been alone for a long time, she realized, and the world he lived in was shaped by loss. But what puzzled her most was the way the house, the animals, and the neighbors all treated her as if she had always belonged. Curiosity mixed with a quiet fear led her to explore more. She began searching the house carefully, room by room, looking for clues about the woman she had replaced. It was in the study, behind a row of old books, that she discovered a small, locked box. It was heavy, made of dark wood, and she could see her reflection faintly in its polished surface. Her hands trembled as she turned the key she had found tucked in a drawer. Inside were letters, neatly tied with ribbons, photographs, and small trinkets. Each item told a story she had never lived. There were letters from friends and family, photographs of the rancher with a smiling woman, the woman she now resembled, celebrating birthdays, holidays, and quiet everyday moments. She could see the joy in their faces, the deep love that had existed. Her heart ached. This was a life she had never asked for, a life that had been taken from someone else, and yet somehow it had become hers to live. She sat on the floor, the letters spread out around her, trying to make sense of it all. The realization was overwhelming. She had not simply woken up in a strange house. She had taken the place of a woman who was loved, remembered, and missed. Every expectation, every routine, every smile she was now asked to give was built on the absence of someone else. She felt a surge of guilt, even though she had done nothing wrong. The rancher entered quietly, noticing the opened box. His expression changed subtly, a mix of sorrow and resignation. "I thought it might be easier if you didn't see that," he said softly. "It's personal." She looked up at him, searching for understanding. "Who was she?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He sighed deeply, taking a seat beside her on the floor. "She was my wife," he said simply. "My world, my life, it all ended the day she died. I didn't think I could go on, and then you appeared." She stared at him, trying to process his words. "I appeared? What do you mean?" He looked down, avoiding her gaze. "I found you, injured, confused, near the edge of the property. You didn't remember who you were. You looked like her enough that I thought maybe you could help me. Maybe you could help us both move on." A cold wave of shock swept over her. She had not been rescued. She had not been found by chance. She had been placed in a life that was already claimed by another, a life that was expected to continue through her. "So, I was supposed to replace her?" she asked, her voice shaking. He nodded, a shadow passing over his face. "I didn't know what else to do. I was desperate. I couldn't live without her, and when you appeared, I thought maybe life could go on. I never meant to hurt you or to take away who you were. I just didn't know how else to survive." The weight of his words pressed down on her. She felt anger, confusion, sadness, and fear all at once. The life she had woken up to was not hers. Every smile, every expectation, every interaction had been built on the absence of someone else's love and memory. And yet, she could see the depth of his grief, the desperation that had driven him to make such a choice. Over the next few days, she observed him more closely, trying to understand the man behind the kindness and the sorrow. She noticed the small ways he honored the memory of his late wife, an empty chair at dinner, the way he talked to the horses as if she were still there, the quiet moments when he would stare at the horizon, lost in thought. She began to understand that his love had never truly ended, and that in her place, she could never replicate what had been lost. She started to realize that her survival in this world depended not just on learning the routines, but on understanding the grief that surrounded her. She needed to navigate a landscape built on memory, absence, and expectation. She could not undo the past, but she could find a way to exist alongside it without losing herself. One afternoon, while walking through the fields, she encountered the neighbors who had visited before. They greeted her warmly, assuming she remembered every conversation, every shared memory. She answered carefully, trying to mimic the warmth and familiarity they expected. It was exhausting but necessary. Every interaction reminded her that she was living another woman's life, and that every mistake could unravel the delicate balance that had been created. She also began noticing moments when the rancher looked at her differently, brief flashes of longing, confusion, or recognition that she was not the woman he had lost. Those moments were almost unbearable, yet they also revealed his humanity. He was a man trapped between memory and reality, grief and hope, love and loss, and she was caught in the middle, trying to survive without becoming a shadow of someone else. At night, she continued her secret habit of journaling. She wrote down every thought, every memory of her own past, every feeling of confusion, fear, and determination. The journal became her lifeline, a private space where she could remind herself of who she truly was, even as she performed the role expected of her. It was a small rebellion, a way to maintain her identity in a world that demanded she become someone else. One evening, while cleaning the house, she discovered an old diary hidden under a pile of books. It belonged to the woman she had replaced. As she read through it, she could feel the life that had once been here, the hopes, the dreams, the small joys, and even the quiet frustrations. She realized that she was not simply living another life. She was stepping into a story that had already been written, a story that could never be hers in full. Every word, every memory, every emotion belonged to someone else. The more she learned about the woman who had died, the more complex her feelings became. She felt sorrow for the woman who had been lost, guilt for the life she had been forced to inhabit, and a growing understanding of the man who had placed her here. He had acted out of grief, desperation, and love, but he had also taken away her freedom, her identity, and her future. Days turned into weeks, and she began to master the routines of ranch life. She could feed the animals efficiently, mend fences, and manage the chores that had once seemed impossible. She could speak to neighbors with confidence, answer questions about the land, and even smile in a way that seemed natural. Yet every success reminded her that she was performing, that she was living a borrowed life. The rancher noticed her growing confidence and began to rely on her more. He entrusted her with decisions about the farm, the animals, and the household. She could see the relief in his eyes, the way he seemed to find some comfort in her presence. And yet, she knew that no matter how competent she became, she could never replace the love, the memory, and the connection he had shared with the woman who had died. One afternoon, as the sun set over the fields, she confronted him directly. "I need to know the truth," she said, her voice firm but calm. "I need to understand what happened. Why am I here? Why did you place me in her life?" He looked at her, eyes filled with both sorrow and regret. "I was lost," he admitted. "I didn't know how to go on. When you appeared, I thought maybe life could continue. I never meant to hurt you. I couldn't bear to be alone. I thought you could help both of us." She felt a mixture of anger, compassion, and sadness. The truth was worse than she had imagined, yet it also explained everything: the expectations, the routines, the subtle pressure to become someone else. She realized that she had been placed in a delicate, almost impossible situation. She could continue to live this life, performing the role expected of her, or she could reclaim her own identity and face the consequences. That night, she lay awake, thinking about the future. She understood that survival required more than skill or patience. It required courage. She could not undo the past, but she could decide how to move forward. She could navigate the grief, the memory, and the expectations around her, while still holding on to her own identity. As she drifted into sleep, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would learn from this life, survive in this world, and understand the man who had placed her here, but she would not allow herself to be defined by the absence of another. She was not a replacement. She was not a shadow. She was a woman who had survived the impossible, and she would find a way to exist, fully and authentically, in a life that was both hers and not hers. The days that followed were filled with both routine and revelation. Every task, every interaction, every quiet moment became a test of her strength and resilience. She had stepped into a life that had been interrupted by tragedy, but she had also discovered that within that life was a space for her own growth, her own understanding, and her own identity. And while the shadow of the woman who had died would always be present, she now understood that she had the power to live her own story within the story she had inherited. The morning light filtered through the curtains once again, soft and warm, but it no longer felt unfamiliar. After weeks of confusion, adaptation, and quiet observation, she had begun to understand the rhythms of this life. The ranch, the animals, the chores, all had become a part of her daily world. Yet despite the skill and routine she had developed, the questions that haunted her remained. Who was she really? And how could she live in a life built on the absence of someone else? She moved through the house, noting the small details that had once seemed strange. The photos of the woman she had replaced still lined the walls. The locked room upstairs remained untouched, a quiet reminder of secrets and memories she was not yet meant to uncover. She glanced at the rancher, who was already outside tending to the animals, and saw the lines of grief still etched in his face, softened only by the presence of someone to share the work and the days. As she stepped outside, the vast landscape greeted her like an old friend she had not yet known. The wind carried the familiar scent of earth and grass, the distant mountains stood like silent witnesses, and the animals moved around her with calm acceptance. She had come to know them, to understand their needs and habits. They had become a quiet comfort in a life filled with uncertainty. The rancher approached, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "Good morning," he said, his voice gentle but steady. "I thought we could start with the fences today. There's a section that needs repair before the evening." She nodded, appreciating his straightforwardness. Today, however, she had her own plan. She had spent long hours reflecting, journaling, and observing. She realized that while she had learned to live this life, she could no longer pretend that it was hers to fully inhabit. She needed answers, clarity, and a decision about what her future would hold. As they worked, she watched him closely. There was a tenderness in his actions, a familiarity in the way he moved and spoke that spoke of the life he had shared with the woman before her. Yet, she saw moments when he hesitated, when his eyes searched hers for a connection that she could never give in full. It was in those moments that she knew she had to speak, to confront the truth of her situation once and for all. After the morning's work, she asked him to sit with her in the shade of a large oak tree. The rancher complied, though a flicker of concern crossed his face. "What is it?" he asked, his voice calm but cautious. "I need to understand everything," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I need to know why I'm here, why this life was given to me, and why I was expected to become someone I'm not." He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I suppose it's time," he admitted. "You deserve the truth." He told her the story in detail, recounting the days after his wife had died. The grief that had consumed him, the loneliness that had pressed down like a heavy weight, and the fear of living alone on the ranch. He spoke of the moment he found her, unconscious near the edge of the property, and how her resemblance to his late wife had struck him with an impossible hope. In his desperation, he had allowed her to take the place of the woman he loved, believing that perhaps life could continue through her. As she listened, a mix of emotions coursed through her. Shock, anger, and betrayal mingled with a deep, reluctant understanding of his grief. She realized that his actions, though unfair to her, had been born from loss and fear, not malice. And yet, she could not ignore the truth. She had been placed in a life that was not hers, expected to perform, to smile, and to live in a shadow she could never escape. For hours, they sat in silence afterward. The rancher's eyes were filled with remorse, and she felt the weight of both their losses pressing down on her. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the fields in shades of gold and orange. She felt the cool breeze on her face and the soft warmth of the earth beneath her, and for the first time, she considered her own future in this world. She knew she could continue to live on the ranch, performing the role expected of her. She could master every task, greet every neighbor with practiced warmth, and fill the void left by the woman who had died. But in doing so, she would lose herself entirely, becoming a shadow of someone else. She could not allow that. The decision weighed heavily on her, but she found clarity in the quiet moments of reflection. She would confront the past, face the grief, and reclaim her identity. She would honor the life that had been lost, but she would not let it define her. She was her own person with her own memories, desires, and future. That evening, as the rancher prepared dinner, she spoke again. "I can't continue living as her," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "I respect her memory, and I understand your grief, but I am not her. I need to live my own life in my own way." He looked at her, a mix of sadness and relief in his eyes. "I understand," he said softly. "I suppose I hoped you could help me heal, but I see now that you need to heal yourself too." Over the following days, they worked together to adjust their lives. She continued to help on the ranch, not as a replacement, but as a partner in daily life, while also planning her departure. The rancher respected her decision, grateful for the time they had shared, and she felt a sense of empowerment she had never known. She had survived confusion, fear, and the weight of another person's memory, and she was finally able to step into her own story. Before she left, she took one last walk through the fields. The sun was rising, casting light over the golden grass and distant mountains. She felt the wind on her face, the earth beneath her feet, and the quiet hum of life all around her. She paused, taking in the beauty of the world that had been forced upon her. Though it had been a life she did not choose, it had taught her strength, resilience, and the importance of choosing oneself. She turned to the rancher one last time. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything, for your kindness, for your patience, and for showing me what it means to live fully, even if it wasn't my life at first." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "Take care of yourself," he said. "And remember, you are your own person. Never forget that." With that, she walked away from the ranch, carrying only a small bag and her journal. Each step was deliberate, a conscious choice to move forward into a life that was truly hers. The field stretched out around her, the mountains stood tall in the distance, and the wind whispered through the grass like a quiet farewell. As she traveled, she reflected on the journey she had endured. She had woken up in a life that was not hers, faced confusion and fear, learned the rhythms of a world she did not know, and uncovered the truth of why she had been placed there. She had confronted grief, both her own and that of the man who had lost someone he loved. And most importantly, she had chosen herself. She knew the future was uncertain. She did not know what awaited her beyond the ranch, beyond the wide fields and the mountains she had come to know. But she felt a sense of freedom she had never experienced before, a freedom born not from circumstance, but from choice. She was no longer living in the shadow of another's life. She was free to create her own story, in her own time, on her own terms. The journey ahead would not be easy, she realized. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and the lingering memory of the life she had stepped into. But she felt ready. She had survived the impossible, adapted to the unknown, and reclaimed her identity. And that strength would carry her forward, wherever the path might lead. As the sun rose higher, she smiled quietly to herself. She was a woman who had faced fear, confusion, and loss, yet had emerged stronger, wiser, and determined. The world was vast, full of possibilities, and she was ready to embrace it fully. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun, the cool wind, and the endless horizon before her. And with that, she walked into her future, no longer a replacement, no longer a shadow, but a woman fully, unapologetically herself.